Hi there, I'm nicodehaan. Welcome to Living a Primal Lifestyle, where we explore a return to a more balanced, natural, wild world.
To recover our natural health and regain our rights and freedoms, I'm nicodehaan.
It's a beautiful day in Durango, Colorado, 77 degrees, going up to 82, and summer is here, I think.
Oh, I did the weeding yesterday. I did.
Yeah,
So,
we did some gardening. Yeah,
I was trying to remember the last time I weeded anything, and I couldn't.
It's been a long thing. Well, we're going to talk about some of that today, about remembering things. Please subscribe to our channel, Living a Primal Lifestyle, on YouTube, and hit the notification bell, the like button, to help our channel grow. And we also post the show on Facebook and LinkedIn for your convenience. All the topics for today's show are in the show notes, listed below in the description, so you can follow along and do your own research. Now, we highly recommend Mother Earth Labs for all your vitamin needs if you wish to enhance your diet with natural and effective supplements. Hit the link in the show notes to maximize your nutrition with two products, humic, fulvic, and the essential multivitamins. These two products give you all the essential vitamins, minerals, and amino acids required for a healthy immune system, with the ability to access them in your body and also to detox at the same time. They also make a great selection of other products that may interest you. And today's show is called, Can We Biohack Aging, and Do We Need to? I don't know, let's get going. Okay, so the first item on the list here is I'm nearly 60. Here's what I learned about growing old.
And this is written with somewhat tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, it is.
But it raises some very interesting issues.
Yeah, so the author, Tim Doling from The Guardian, he says the parameters of middle age have become generously expanded over the years. For a long time, I thought I might avoid old age altogether because the minimum qualifying limit was sliding forward faster than I was. Middle age, by some definitions, now extends to 60 or even 65. Whoa. Which gives me a bit of a reprieve, he says. But he says, what I've learned about what it's really like to getting old, he says, not a lot, but here it is. And he gave us 13 things to think about. And I thought we'd start off with that. A little humor doesn't hurt.
A little humor doesn't.
So the first one is the real difference between youth and age is not physical or even mental. It's just added weight of all the years piled up behind you. You can call it experience if you want, but having considerable past doesn't necessarily confer any wisdom. It just compresses time. So the things that happened last week and the things that happened in the middle 1980s, side by side, fit side by side in your memory. Mm-hmm. This isn't a problem as long as you restrict your conversational circle to other old people, he says.
You know, it's interesting. If you ever talk to anybody about how old they are or how they feel about being that old, you know, they always say, now I don't think of myself as that old. I have a mental picture of myself at a certain age, and that's how I think about myself. And I remember one lady of the next generation up saying to me, you know, I look in the mirror and think, who is that?
Yeah.
You know, and it's just a mental process. And
well, I always had some favorite years. When I was 10 years old, I always reflect back to being 10 as the ultimate freedom, but also I really liked 16. You know, I was in high school.
You could drive.
Things like that. So there's certain freedoms involved in that.
Yeah, mine's in my mid to late 20s because I was finally out of my house and living as an independent adult and governing my own life.
Yeah.
And but those are just happy memories. I don't wish to go back. I have no interest in going back. Yeah,
I look at the age as decades. So I look at my 30s and 40s and 50s, and I think about specific times during those decades that things that I liked. I try not to look at the things that went wrong. Of course.
Well, of course, and the human mind is such that I tend to remember the points in my life that I tend to remember are those where something went wrong. Yeah. And not so much the stuff that was good and happy and
Yeah,
fine.
I think
and
it's important to look at the other side of these things, because I think we automatically go to the trauma that happened, but also looking back and kind of reminiscing about the years that were great is really good. We've had, all the years we've had together are great as far as I'm concerned. It's just been a really good. So number 2.
Number 2, being old also means having to contend with enormous invisible volume of everything you've done and completely forgotten about. So at age 20, because you haven't lived very long, you can remember pretty much your whole life. And by age 60, you will have forgotten entire holidays, scores of books you've read, hundreds of arguments, and upward of 1,000 former acquaintances, and all the popular music released between 1999 and 2004.
We tend to recommend or look at the ones that are like the 60s and 70s, because those were the favorite music.
Well, that was the coming of age years, and we associate the music with the experiences we had as as late teens and young adults, So, and it says here that isn't memory loss; it's just a shedding of things your brain has deemed as superfluous.
Number 3, at some point during your middle years, you start.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Let me go back just for a second here. When he says, talking about when you're 20, when you're 60, age is a number. That's it. And if you sit and dwell on, oh my God, I have more years behind me than I have ahead of me, and I'm old, and all of this stuff, then you are old.
Yeah, because you're looking at the negative parts of what you think are negative parts. Yeah.
And your mindset is old. If you only think about, oh gosh, I could die any time now, then that's not a good place for your brain to be or your body to be.
Yeah, and we often talk about the fact that, we need to be positive in our lives to be happy, for sure. So number 3 is at some point during your middle years, you start to notice that whenever you stand up or sit down, you make a noise, an involuntary groan of exertion when rising from a chair.
I'm making that noise, but it's because my quads are screaming from the weeding I did yesterday.
Well, it does seem to affect a little bit more, but I think in the last, 15 years or so, I've noticed less of that. And I think this really has to do with not just our lifestyle, because we're busy and active, but also our diet. I think less inflammatory things.
Yeah, sure.
So your muscles can rebound faster, and I think
you don't have aches and pains. You don't wake up in the morning with aches and pains like some people do.
Not as much. Yeah, I still have them.
Sometimes you'll tweak something at jiu-jitsu or you'll be working in the yard or something and you'll have a little soreness, But
generally, I don't have the aches and pains that a lot of people
complain. Your knees don't hurt, your hips don't hurt, your back doesn't hurt when you get up in the morning, and I think that's...
Not normally.
The other thing is not falling into the chair. If we lower ourselves into the chairs or onto the couch, and that continues to keep your legs strong.
Well, I think doing things like squatting, just as a general practice, not only for the strength, but for the flexibility. Being able to sit like our ancestors did, I think, is an important quality to have physically.
It keeps your body flexible, your legs and your back.
So number 4.
Okay, number 4. Even so, without regular external reminders, it's hard to think of yourself as old. And it sometimes comes as a shock. And he says a few years ago he was shopping and he saw this stooped, wizened man following him around the mall, and he realized there were just mirrors everywhere. And he was seeing himself. And, I had the experience one time. I was traveling to California, and my flight was a little later in the afternoon, and there was a 3-hour time difference, and I was quite tired. And I was president of CAI, Community Associations Institute, so I had this huge suite. And the bedroom, the front door was at one end, and the bedroom was at the totally other end, and it was glass windows all the way across. Nighttime, and I had to walk from the front door to the bedroom, and then I realized I wanted to put something in the kitchen, so I walked all the way back to the kitchen, And then I was walking back to the bedroom and I happened to look in the window and there I was all like, stooped over. And I started laughing, straightened myself out, and
that is a funny picture when you look in the mirror and you find yourself hunched over and you don't recognize yourself at first, and then you straighten yourself out. And, oh, there I am.
Yeah, but he says, he says there were mirrors everywhere. They even had them running up the sides of the elevators. I don't go to that mall anymore.
So number 5 is when old people look at each other, at other old people they've known for a long time, they see a weird hybrid of the younger person they once knew and the improbably wrinkled one in front of them. Mm-hmm. This doesn't work with old people you've just met. They just look ancient.
Oh boy.
I haven't really noticed that as much, but...
And the interesting thing about it is sometimes I'll look at someone and they say, well, I'm 62, and I think, boy, you look older than I do, and I'm significantly past 62, you know, and so it's a matter of the choices we make, the food we eat, and the lifestyle that we lead.
Maybe.
No, maybe.
From the perspective of a young person, it may seem almost improbable to be impossible to be happy and old. And while it's true, there are a remarkable number of things to complain about in old age, there's also a statistically significant. I'm making up my own words here.
Well, strategically is the correct word, but it doesn't work in this context.
Right. Significant lessening of mood.
Lightning.
Why don't you read this?
Okay. There's also a statistically significant lightening of your mood, according to personal satisfaction surveys. The least happy demographic are those aged 40 to 59, and after about 54, your outlook improves steadily. So, and it seems to be utterly unrelated to the fix you find yourself in, so you can look forward to actually growing older.
Yeah, the stumbling across words kind of reminds me of some songs. You sang them for 20 years, and then all of a sudden...
You look up the lyrics.
You look up the lyrics, and they're different than you sing.
Right. But I heard...
But often I say, I like my lyrics better. So I don't know if that...
Yeah, that's fine. It's just a matter of, your dyslexia is kicking in. And
sometimes I just go skim over words too.
So slow down a little.
I'm going to slow down. Mm-hmm. Now, number 7, the years from a late middle age onward are also marked by a steadily erosion of ambition. I don't know if that's true. No. The cause isn't so much a loss of drive as a growing realization that you aren't going to change the world after all. You're just going to die and be forgotten just like everything else. Yeah, I think about that sometimes, It's just like all of a sudden you're gone 100 years later and nobody's talking about you, nobody's thinking about you.
Yeah, but
that's the way life is.
Well, except for one thing. It's been my experience that I personally have had the experience of having people come up to me 10 years later and say, wow, you really made a difference in my life when you did this, or when you said that, or I attended a class. Constantly that happens. And so to me, it's not about what happens after I'm gone. No, it's about what kind of a difference can I make in the world while I'm here. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. And it's not about ambition. It's about just continuing to be kind and to support and mentor.
And doing what you think is right, too. Mm-hmm. And just supporting other people.
Being an example.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So number 8.
A young person asks, why do old people have the radio on all the time? Is it like company for them? Well, 40 years ago, well, for us, longer than that, we turned on the radio. The music was a part of the fabric of our lives.
It was.
And, it's been on ever since, and we're never going to turn it off. It says here, you can turn it off when we're dead.
Yeah, it was in the early 60s when, of course, the stereo came. First it was mono and the AM radio. Mm-hmm. Then all of a sudden you had FM, and with the ability to hear the different speakers.
Well, it was later than that. It was because early 60s was when...
It was 69, 70.
Yeah. Because late 50s and early 60s was when rock and roll began.
Yeah.
And the Beatles' first song was in the early 60s.
64, 63, 64.
63, 64. So... you know, the Beatles were already advanced. I mean, what was it? Rock Around the Clock was 1957 or something like that. Yeah, or Bill Haley and the Commons, or singing in the late 50s, whatever it was. So, and then stereo came out in the late 60s.
Yeah, I'm thinking 69, maybe 68.
Yeah.
I remember I went to Sears and I bought this used, because I couldn't afford the new one, but somebody had brought one back, and it was a stereo with a record player on top of it, and I brought that home, and it was something silly like $50 or something like that, which at that time was a half a week's pay. But
well, and then the other part that I remember is being in the car and having a speaker on each side,
and listening to different tones.
They didn't have it blended at that time, so you could hear the right channel when the right channel was playing, the left channel when the left channel was playing, and there was a Led Zeppelin song, was it, that had the split, and then you could hear, you know, it would go one side and then the other side, and then it would cross over. Yes, Whole Lot of Love.
And you had the echo.
Yeah. Doo-doo.
Yeah.
Doo-doo.
Okay, so number 9, it's inevitable that one ages as one becomes more cautious, although the precautions observed may not always be consistent or even rational. Collected weight of all the times you've cheated death inevitably leaves you with a sense of luck, and it may be soon running out.
That your luck may be.
Yeah,
and his father told him, I'm very careful on the stairs because everyone I know died falling down the stairs.
Yeah, I've never had that feeling at all.
No.
I don't mean falling up the stairs, but being more cautious.
No.
I guess I've been always a wild and crazy guy. Okay, number 10.
Monotasking is the great skill of late middle age. Doing one thing to the exclusion of all others.
Yeah, getting lost in a puzzle or anything like that is.
Well, you know, I did
pleasurable.
some research a couple years ago and determined that the human brain cannot multitask.
I think men have a harder time than women do.
The human brain does not multitask. It focuses on one thing at a time. So if you got a TV program on and you're looking at your iPad and get focused on something you're looking at on your iPad, and then I say something, none of it registers because you can't focus on 3 things at one time.
You can do tasks like that, but as far as focusing the mind, I think you're right on that. But you can multitask.
I can make bacon while be portioning out my vitamins.
But we're not really talking about that. We're talking about how the mind is occupied.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but he does say that this means that it's a great time to pick up a new skill because you can focus. You have more focus and more patience on one thing. Yeah. So he talks about drawing, painting, musical instruments, foreign languages, and so on. The restlessness that made discipline and regular practice annoying when you were 15 is gone by the time you're 50. Yeah. So you're more inclined to repeat and to practice. It's interesting.
Yeah. Number 11, after 50, one begins to recognize oneself as a growing resistance to change, if only because it is so often nullifies years of hard-won training. Certain common stereotypes of older people as creatures bewildered by technology and outfoxed by the ordinary packaging. You see that opening any kind of medications.
Child-proof medications, yes.
Yeah. So it says, I have decades of experience in getting the lids off of things and all that. Yeah, it may be true.
Well, you know, I was reading this and I was thinking about resistance to change. And I'm thinking, okay, for my 75th birthday, we sold our house, moved from Florida after 50 years, and bought a new house and landed in Colorado.
Yep.
Now, if that isn't change...
It's a big change.
It's a big change.
Yeah. And we embraced it, though.
Yeah, and the point is that, yes, people don't like change, but I think it's more they don't like change in their daily lives, in their routines, the places they like to go, or the boss, or the coworkers, or changing jobs, you know, it becomes more of a hassle.
Yeah, I agree.
And getting a new iPhone, but
used to be a thrill, and now this phone works okay.
yeah, well, and the point is that you can't, change isn't good or bad, it's just different.
That's true.
And you have to adopt that attitude and embrace change, and it's a fact of life, it's not going to stop, so.
Number 12, everyone needs to stop inventing new and exciting ways to turn the shower on and off. What happened to knobs? I guess he has a one of these.
Push button or adjustable dial. I think we'll just kind of laugh
Skip
at that one and go on.
Okay, read 13.
Old people can sometimes seem aloof, vaguely disapproving, rude, dismissive, mistrustful, and slow to grasp subtlety, when really they're just a bit hard of hearing. So try repeating what you said a little louder and see if you can get more engaged response the second time. Inevitably, some old people will find this patronizing, and I didn't say we weren't difficult. Well, I think, you know, part of feeling aloof and appearing to be aloof or disapproving or whatever has to do with not really comprehending the new generation or the new way things are done, or not feeling comfortable with it. And it comes across like, or being lonely, or being isolated, so that they're not. You can become unsocialized if you don't socialize.
Yeah, probably so.
And I think that may contribute even more than hard of hearing. So,
okay, I think we stopped.
We've beaten that one to death. But we did.
Article number 2. Discovery of why we decline after 70 paves the way for new therapies to tackle aging.
Okay, a blood-based discovery as to why humans tend to become frailer after 70 is opening doors to new therapies to manage the decline and disease associated with growing old. And researchers from the Sanger Institute in Cambridge discovered our blood undergoes a drastic change in older age, which increases our risk of developing diseases and hampers our immune function.
Yeah, these young blood cells with the potential to become red or white blood cells or platelets were often taken from 10 humans aged 0 to 80 plus and were analyzed in a study published in Nature. Using these, the researchers were able to sequence the genomes of 10 people and looked at the differences in their blood.
Yeah, and what happened, what the study revealed was that stem cells took on an average of 17 mutations per year after birth, as well as losing around 30 base pairs a year from their telomeres. And the telomeres are the kind of little, the ends of your genes.
Yeah, they're kind of like the little program that tells everything.
How long you're going to live, basically.
And when they shorten, you don't have as much information there.
So it says telomere shortening like this can be influenced by a person's lifestyle and is associated with aging and the onset of age-related disease.
Yeah, the genome sequencing also revealed that for adults aged 65 and under, blood is made up of a diverse community of stem cells in the region of 20,000 to 200,000, which churn out red and white and platelet cells. However, for people aged 65 and over, there are fewer than 100 different types of stem cells doing that same job.
That's a big difference.
That's a huge difference, and I think that's why some of these age-related therapies that are now out, like the NMN that we talk about, and the NAD from Dr. What's his name? I forget his name. But we've talked about it on previous shows. And these actually help lengthen the telomeres and replace some of those.
Perfect aminos.
Perfect aminos are another source of things. And there's vitamins that we take specifically aimed at aging to help us age better and retain some of these things. I think still a lot of it has to do with food. And as we get older, we tend not to eat as healthy. And strictly, a lot has to do, I think, with financial situation. You start getting cheaper cuts of meat, perhaps. You stop eating meat, as you know the companies would like us to do. And I think there's not as much nutrition in the other types of food.
I think there's also some element of it's too much trouble to cook a big meal, and
maybe so.
If you're by yourself. You tend to just grab something.
Especially in a lot of the older folks in the older generation, like my parents, their teeth, because of the war and everything, were not that good. So if you don't have the teeth and you have false teeth, it's harder to chew with things, and then you don't have the nutrition there.
Yeah, and it's and apparently there are a lot of people who kind of their appetite diminishes as they grow older as well.
Yeah, taste buds. So this lacking of diversity is a result of mutated stem cells self-proliferating, something that can happen throughout the lifetime. By the age of 70, they have effectively taken over.
Yeah, this is interesting because it's mutated cells that take over, and they're not as good. Some of these cells are not as good as your originals.
And some of them don't work at all, perhaps.
And by the time they take over, and then they take over, and it means that your blood is then being crafted by a small population of faulty stem cells, not only of poorer quality, but putting older people at higher risk of sickness and slow recovery.
Right, and again, I think this is directly tied to the nutrition, the nutrition of the food as you're getting older. So it says here also, however, it's not all bad news, as establishing a firmer understanding of why this drop off in health occurs at age 70, one day it could enable us to formulate effective therapies to counter the effect of these selfish mutant stem cells.
Well, maybe they were already doing treatments with stem cells, and and immunotherapy. So it's possible that we could replenish.
Yeah, and in fact, some of the I've heard stories of the very wealthy people replacing their blood with younger versions of the blood that they had. So when they were in their 20s, they took and stored this blood, and now they're in their 70s, and you get this blood back, and this is the youthful blood. So it makes sense from this article that something like that could help you. I think just keeping your nutrition as a high level will do the same thing.
Well, and living a positive lifestyle and doing all the things that we've been talking about.
Yeah. So there's been a lot of different research in cancer lately, and this next article talks about rectal cancer disappearing after experimental use of immunotherapy. Immunotherapy. So this is your immune system therapy. So
they're treating a particular type of a clinical trial for a particular type of
I have a joke in there, but I'm not going to use it.
Good. Thank you. There's a particular type of rectal cancer. What is it called?
Rectal cancer, I think.
No, but there's a particular, here we go. Tumors with a specific genetic makeup known as mismatch repair deficient or microsatellite instability. So MMRD is the acronym for mismatch repair deficient. And what they're saying is that those particular type of tumors responded not only extremely well, but resulted in complete remission of
all the people. And they had 14.
Every person in the study.
They had 14 people in the study, and all of them they recovered. And after, I think, a 2-year period.
They're still cancer-free.
Still cancer-free. So this is a huge step in this type of cancer. Whether this rolls over into other types of cancer, maybe.
Well, but it gives them something. It gives them something to work from. What it says here is immune cells contain a safeguard called a checkpoint, and it prevents them from attacking normal cells. Cancer cells can trip the safeguard and shut down the immune cells, which allow a tumor to hide and grow. But immunotherapy, there's an immunotherapy agent called a checkpoint inhibitor, which releases the brake on an immune cell, freeing it to recognize and attack cancer cells. When the brakes are taken off the immune cells, MMRD cells look especially strange because they have so many mutations. All right, so what I was saying was that there's an immunotherapy agent called a checkpoint inhibitor that releases the brake on an immune cell, freeing it to recognize and attack cancer cells. And when the brakes are taken off the immune cells, these MMRD cells look especially strange because they have so many mutations, so the immune cells attack with much more force.
Okay,
interesting. It's very interesting. So it'll be they started out with trying it out before the cancer had metastasized as a first line of treatment, because the treatment for rectal cancer is quite extreme. It's chemotherapy, it's radiation, and then it's surgery.
Yeah.
And it can affect all kinds of functions and for the rest of your life.
Yeah. And so this new treatment actually is kind of a shrinkage. They shrink these cells, and
tumor,
it seems to be working really well. So it's
completely
cool.
gone.
Yeah.
Then, and it very quickly they saw immediate results. I mean, the first after one treatment they saw results, and it's about
and no bleeding anymore. That's
that was it. There were quite a few things, and it was just it's
pretty cool.
Very interesting, and it'll be interesting indeed to see what happens, how this can be applied more broadly, and where this takes the research.
Yeah, so the next article is a woman receives 3D printed ear made from her own cells. So this is another example of science really helping in the field of reconstructing cells. Right now it's just an ear, which is probably one of the more simpler forms.
It's cartilage.
Yeah, but I mean, I can envision that, especially with organs. Now, if you can reproduce organs, if you can reproduce limbs and things like that, that's going to be a huge thing in the future. But this is just a step.
Well, now for me this was interesting because initially the 3D machines would take paper or whatever, and make whatever the thing was.
Right.
Here they used, let's see, what is it?
Well, they used their own cells.
Yeah, they grew the cells.
Yep.
And
well, let's start at the beginning. Doctors successfully transplanted a 3D printed ear made from human cells onto a woman born with a rare ear deformity. The Regenerative Medicine Company behind the implant announced that the transplant was part of the first clinical trial of this technology, and its success marks a more major step forward in tissue engineering.
And
so before
there's a condition called microtia or microtia.
Yeah, which shrinks the
when the babies are born with very small ears or no outside ears at all.
Right.
And previously they reconstructed from rib grafts or synthetic materials. This takes a biopsy from the patient's existing ear, pulls out the cartilage cells. The cells are grown, and then using that as your medium, they print it, the 3D print, into the shape of the patient's ear.
The ear keeps regenerating cartilage over the patient's lifetime, and because it's made from their own cells, it's less likely to be rejected, which makes sense.
Yeah.
Ears are simpler than organs, and unlike livers, are necessarily...
they're not necessary.
...to keep people alive, so it'll take a long time. The potential future of this is huge, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, again, very interesting preliminary research, and we'll see where it goes. I hope they're not.
Well, we're printing lots of things today, and this next article kind of reminds me of that, the secret to tastier fake meat.
Fake meat? I
means
mean, really?
breeding better beans.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have an ability of making beans better, why not just stick with better beans?
Better beans with more protein, right. Mm-hmm.
But, so this is the trend, of course. We've been talking about this for the last few years, how they want us to move to plant-based.
Well, this was interesting to me because they point out in this article that said that there was a survey in 2019 that had over 1,000 consumers in Germany said that plant-based meat substitutes didn't taste good, their textures were unpleasant, and they weren't switching over. And in fact, interest seems to be waning.
Sales were down nearly 7% in November of 2021 from the previous year. So at first it might be a novelty,
right.
I'm eating healthy, look, and no meat and everything like that. And then sooner or later the taste buds come in and say, wait a minute, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. But this is a trend that's coming. We know this because food manufacturers know that if they make it out of plant, it's going to automatically last longer on the shelf.
Yeah.
Because plants, you put a piece of meat on the table, you put some vegetables on the table, and the meat is going to go away faster.
Yeah, I just wonder how they talk about, it's better for the environment and everything else, but you have to process these plants quite substantially.
Yes, and that's a good point. And the other point is, too, they're saying in here, the reason we want to do this is because the way we raise animals is not good for the environment. But I would say that the type of farming that we do in that big scale, like we do animal husbandry in a large scale.
Stockyards and pens are not good for
it's
the
the same
environment.
as the wheat fields that are and the corn fields that are out west. And that's all there are these corn fields with 3 stalks on them. And there's thousands and thousands of them. And insects, will flock to these things. So then we have to use pesticides. The insects, if it's interspersed in a garden, you're not going to have as much intrusion as you would if you have one big field. So it's not just how we treat the animals, it's also how we treat the fields of amber grains, let's say.
Yeah, well, and there's that, what do they call it? The rotation of the crops. And
and a lot of that stuff.
Replenishment of the fields.
And we don't do that as much. We tend to put synthetics on it. So this is only one part of the process. He says we're developing new crops all the time that may taste worse than before, but we have a tasting panel. So they had this panel that they used, and they would, offer these things to the panel, and they would say, does it taste good? And then if they've got a bunch of products that were tasting pretty good to this panel, then they'd shoot it to an outside source, see if they could get the same response from people who weren't involved in the company.
Well, when they were doing the research, they found that the constant breeding of things like soybeans for animal feed lowered their protein content.
Yeah.
And they said...
And this is a problem within itself, because if you're mass-producing soybeans or other feed like corn, so you're producing it in mass quantities and you're producing it for a higher yield, not so much for the protein. You're giving this to the animals, and now you want us to eat those animals?
Well, that's the first problem. The second problem is that plant protein is already difficult for us to digest unless it's treated, and we talked about the fermenting or the souring or
and I don't see
whatever.
anything talking about fermenting.
But here's what they talk about: is they said they realized that the higher the protein content, the better the flavor. So they said they analyzed the genomes of a wide variety of plants and learned which plant genes are associated with traits like higher protein content. Then they selected crop species with the traits they were looking for, crossbred them to see which combinations create the best future crops, and then but then they say, when selecting for a trait like higher protein, it's still important to maintain the properties of domestication, like yield and disease resistance.
Yeah.
So we're still dealing with some level of, are they out there with the Roundup or, what exactly?
And the other thing is that processing crops, you can add things to them, and this is what we're talking about, if they want to add
GMO,
flavor.
genetically modified.
Well, in a sense, but they also add salty and metallic or artificial residual flavors and mix them with the high protein. So really what you're talking about is highly processed food at this point, which we all know the more processed, the less
well, they said
nutrition.
They actually said here that higher protein content changes the chemical composition of the crop, and then by default will change the taste. So the taste is our tongues reacting to chemical stimuli. Then they also said processing the crops can add the salty, metallic, or artificial residual flavors. So with high protein variants, there's less to process. Yeah. So they're thinking maybe some of this unpleasant flavor.
You're doing it all in one process, so they're not doing different stages of process. The problem with this theory is there's always been the theory that your taste buds go towards nutrition. So your taste buds are automatically, otherwise why would we have taste buds? We can eat anything, right?
Yeah.
So if it tastes good, it's nutritious. And now are we tricking the body, saying here's something that tastes good and it's not as nutritious? I don't know.
Well, this is interesting because a professor at the University of Minnesota, he specializes in researching flavor. He's skeptical about the processing argument. And he says that undesirable off flavors don't come from the processing, but are inherent in the actual plants themselves. As the plant grows, chemical process it goes through creates byproducts, which are small molecules that don't taste so good. So if you take, even if you can make a really high protein plant source, there's still going to be some weird flavors. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. So regardless of the crops involved, the author
the researchers who are who are looking for the protein.
Yeah, they're adamant about raising the amount of protein in plant products, and that will drive their success. He says, we have seen that protein overwhelmingly dictates the taste and the mouthfeel. And again, I would say the nutrition too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, many factors that influence taste and texture of plant-based food, but protein makes the biggest impact because it's the most prominent ingredient by volume in a plant-based burger, aside from water. Great.
Protein is what separates the mediocre, dry, beanie burger from a truly delicious, juicy, meaty burger.
Yeah, meaty. There's no meat in the burger whatsoever.
Yeah,
so, somewhere along the line, hopefully, somebody will figure out you can't say meat when there isn't any.
So,
Speaking of meat,
6 ways to recognize top quality beef at the grocery store, according to experts. There are different aspects of beef quality, including the color, tenderness, flavor, juiciness, and texture. He says, thus we've got different things that consumers need to know about selecting meat.
High quality meat. Yeah,
so
the USDA's Agricultural Marketing Service created a beef grading system.
Yeah.
And those are, although the U.S. Department of Agriculture has to, there is inspection of meat, but the grading system is not mandatory, it's voluntary.
Yeah. There's 8 grades of beef, and you're probably only heard of 3 of them, the prime, the choice, and the select. The remaining 5 are standard, commercial, utility, cutter, and canner. So it sounds to me, just like from those things, the first 3 probably give you pretty good quality meats, and the rest are kind of used as fillers.
Well, they're used in soups, and they're used in frozen dinners.
And feeding other animals, perhaps, things like
eventually,
that.
Yeah. But it's interesting.
So let's go over the top 3.
Okay. Prime. Prime beef is produced from young, well-fed cattle. It has the most marbling. That's your natural fat. And it's produced in smaller quantities than other grades and is often sold in hotels and restaurants. Prime roasts and steaks are excellent for roasting, grilling, or broiling.
Number 2 is choice. The choice of beef is a high quality produced in the highest quantity, but it is less marbling than prime. Choice roasts and steaks, especially from the rib and loin, will be very tender, juicy, and flavorful. They're good for sautéing, for roasting, grilling, or boiling. Less tender cuts are perfect for slow cooking.
Right.
So
then select beef is slightly leaner than prime and choice with less marbling. Then that would mean that it lacks some of the tenderness, flavor, and juiciness as compared to the higher grades. Select grade beef often benefits from slow cooking or marination prior to grilling or broiling.
So this gives you 3 of the meats that are commonly found in the butcher shop.
And the grocery store.
And the grocery store. And according to this, and they don't mention nutrition, but I would say prime has the most nutrition. Choice is the second, and select is third. So beyond the grades, we need to look out for things like coloring and things like that.
Yeah, it says that quality beef is cherry red, and you're looking for, and that's because there's protein myoglobin in there, and it has iron in it.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it red. But if you see brown meat, don't buy it. It just means it's been too long in the store. Marbling is a fancy way of talking about. Number 2 is check the marbling. Marbling is a fancy way of talking about intramuscular fat that's interspersed throughout the beef, and top quality beef has a great deal of marbling. High degree of marbling signifies a high quality meat rich in healthy monounsaturated fatty acids.
Yeah, and the fatty acids, of course, carry a lot of nutrition. We talk about protein having a lot of nutrition, but actually what carries the nutrition and the taste is really about the fats. And fats are what keep us healthy. It's what keeps us from being hungry. It also paves the way for what should I be eating. If it tastes good, that drives the nutrition, and that drives you to eat more.
Yeah, I think we have to be a little careful about saying if it tastes good, because a cupcake tastes good.
Well, I agree, but we're talking about meat here, not a cupcake.
Okay.
We do a lot of things to non-meat products, and that's why they're that's why they're so sought after, because they have this amazing kind of taste. But remember, it's mostly artificial. There's not a lot of plants out there or even grains out there that you can take from the wild and start eating them and say, wow, this is great.
Delicious.
That's right. So we make them that way.
Right.
So, but I still think that the nutrition that our ancestors always were after has to do with the meat, because they didn't bake anything.
They only had other plant-based foods seasonally for a very brief period of time.
Yeah, and those things were amazing, because a lot of them were fruits and roots and things like that that do taste good.
Yeah. Number 3, test the texture.
Yeah.
If you push on a cut of beef, it's mushy or soft, looks like it's going to fall apart, don't buy it.
Yeah, and when I first got into cooking, I had a roommate, Tony, and he was a chef, and he was a manager of this restaurant, and I was playing guitar back in the early 70s there. And one of the things he taught me, he says, when you take a piece of meat, you put it down, and you can press your little finger on it. When it springs back, it's healthy. When it doesn't, the meat is less quality.
It's been frozen, or it isn't as high quality. Yeah. And they say it should be compact, firm, dry, and dense.
Yeah. And, of course, they have the dates on them, too, to help you.
Well, that's a little later on. The intended use of the beef, again, the lower quality grades are fine for soups and stews, and higher quality is better for grilling.
Yeah. Then
he says there's a sell-by date on the meat. So he says, now he does say that you can go up to 72 hours or so past the sell-by date in terms of maybe when you bring it home or
well, refrigeration, of course, has a lot to do with that. And even frozen. You can keep meat frozen for extended period of time, maybe 3
as long as
to
it's
6
sealed
months.
and doesn't have oxygen in it, so it doesn't...
And we have great packaging these days, so you can take all the moisture, or take all the oxygen out of it.
And it says, the good news for consumers is that the beef industry as a whole is currently producing more high-quality beef than ever before, with more than 80% grading at choice or above. Yep. Which is an interesting sentence, because the other articles would have you believe that meat is not being consumed and it's not being produced, and so
it's all bad. It's not
all
good
bad.
for you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Speaking of meat, this is another article talking about AI.
Artificial intelligence.
Yeah. Powered robots are now cloning pigs all by themselves.
No people involved.
Yeah. And I would actually probably feel a little more comfortable that way, in a sense, if you're going to eat a cloned animal that's not touched by humans, you're probably better off, because the technology is such that the intricate parts of the cloning are being able to repeat themselves.
They're being followed to the letter.
To the letter.
Yeah, and there's no human error in there.
Exactly so. But it's an interesting thing, and this is another way of perhaps feeding population rather than waiting for the gestation period of these animals and watching them grow. Now all of a sudden we have little piglets whenever we want them. And we like pork.
Well, it's what they say they were.
Well, they were saying when cloning an animal, a viable egg cell's nucleus needs to be removed. So this is the part that's very hard. These things are very small.
The hand shakes a little, or something happens.
So having a robot do these things And with the aid of microscopes and things like that, this is why
Well, that's
a lot
why
of technologies, even like dental health now, has become much, much better because of the great magnification. You can see this stuff a lot easier. So
Yeah, but that was the problem too, is that when the humans were carrying out the procedure with the aid of the microscope, they found that they could make 1,000 clones by hand in a day. So the next thing that happened was that these AI-powered cells, AI-powered system was turning out a lot more.
About 1,000, 10 times the amount. Yeah.
Yeah.
Each step of the cloning process was automated, and no human operation was involved in this. He says our AI system can calculate the strain within a cell and direct the robot to use minimal force to complete the cloning process, which reduces the cell damage caused by human hands.
Yeah, so we'll see where that goes. I guess pigs have been
messed with for a long time.
Yeah, apparently so.
And the last article we have is Salmonella vaccine for poultry contributed to the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Yeah, we've known for a long time that if overuse of antibiotics has led to mutations in bacteria that became resistant to the then known cures.
Yeah, and that's not only in humans, but also farm animals and things like that, but also the use of antibiotics by us humans. A lot of people throw these things out and they throw them into the environment. In other words, down
the toilet,
in the water. And now we have the runoff being having medications and that in it too. So that's not good for the environment for sure.
This was an investigation into the evolution of Salmonella bacteria infecting Brazilian poultry showed that the introduction of a Salmonella vaccine combined with increasing antibiotic usage by Brazilian farmers has led to the rise of strains that are more antibiotic resistant but less likely to cause disease in humans.
So far. Yeah.
But Salmonella is a common cause of food poisoning in humans, and it results very often from contaminated poultry. Brazil is the largest exporter of
poultry, and also remember vegetables too. Get it on it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. From human, and that comes from human waste in the fields.
Yes. Yeah, or even animal waste, perhaps.
I believe it's human, but I suppose it could. So then it says researchers compared the genomes of 183 Salmonella collected from chickens in Brazil and Salmonella genomes collected from humans, domestic poultry, and imported Brazilian poultry products in the United Kingdom. They also looked at more than 1,200 publicly available genomes of the main types of Salmonella found in Brazil to see what they could learn about the Brazilian strains.
Yep. Through our genomic detective work, we have tracked how the changes in chicken rearing in Brazil have changed the profile of Salmonella bacteria found circulating within the poultry industry. While this poses no immediate health risks to importing countries like the UK, and I guess other countries too, the bacteria were resistant to antimicrobial drugs. And this highlighted the importance of taking our One Health approach that sees the connection between the health of people, animals, and the environment, especially assessing global food supply chains.
Yeah, I'm not sure where they were going with all of this because it doesn't apparently seem to be negative for people.
No, not at this point, but we know that when you start getting vaccines into animals and things like that, there are always unintended consequences. We don't know the whole thing, but when we use different types of drugs, and this drug sounds more like an antibiotic.
Well, I'm trying to figure out what this sentence means. The introduction of a Salmonella vaccine. I don't think they were vaccinating the chickens. I think that, they do the standard treating the chickens with antibiotics. But I think maybe there was, for people, a Salmonella vaccine. We'll have to look into that a little further.
Yeah, this is confusing because it really doesn't say here, but I'm assuming that if
Oh, wait, under the picture up here, it says researchers find that the Salmonella vaccine for poultry.
Yeah, that
Okay,
makes
so
sense.
that, there we go.
Because there's no sense if it doesn't do any harm and it doesn't get to us.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the way it
And
is.
I never heard of a Salmonella vaccine for people. So.
No, I haven't either. In fact, this is the first time I've heard of a vaccine for Salmonella.
Yeah, well, the
So
point
what
here
kind-
is we've heard for a long time about
So it has to be an antibiotic is what I'm
the
thinking.
antibiotic resistant strains of these bacteria come from overuse of antibiotics. And from,
Yeah, and if you're-
so if
if
you
you're-
personally take antibiotics, or if you're eating food that's been treated with antibiotics, be it beef or poultry.
Yeah,
or,
apparently they're immunizing all the chickens, whether they have salmonella or not, right? So it's
Right,
kind of
right,
a preventative thing.
Right,
It's-
but
I
then
mean-
we don't know what that does.
Salmonella is not inside the chicken; it's usually on the outside of the chicken too, isn't it?
No, it's bacterial,
Yeah, it's
so
bacteria.
it's inside.
I don't know about
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Okay,
There's no
well-
such thing as bacterial infection on the outside. I mean, there is, but not for chickens, I don't think.
I don't know. I'm thinking that salmonella usually is some kind of contamination on the surface
Oh,
of the food.
I'm going to look it up real quick.
Okay. What else does it say here? Yeah, not too much. It's interesting, though, that this is just happening.
Salmonella. Okay, Salmonella is a common bacterial disease that affects the intestinal tract.
Oh, okay.
It lives in animal and human intestines and is shed through the feces.
Okay. Okay. So that's how it proliferates. So when they poop, then it spreads. So it's running through their whole system then.
Right.
So that's why a vaccine would make sense. Because you're not going to topically apply anything like that. And that would not make any sense either.
Right.
Okay. Are we confused yet? Well, that's our show today.
It's been a busy morning at the Dahan household.
Yeah, they're on the roof now installing our solar panels. And
If you watched last week, you know we were waiting for them to come. They did come, and now they're actually back. So we'll see
yeah, we'll see
if we
what
have
happens.
solar panels today.
Yeah, I hope so.
I hope so too.
Thanks for sticking around, folks. We'll see you next week.
Be well.
Bye-bye.